My husband and his mistress thought I was 300 miles away. They had no idea I installed a hidden camera in my office after noticing discrepancies in our accounts. When my assistant called me in tears, whispering that they were locked inside my suite, I pulled up the live feed. I watched my husband not only betray our marriage on my own desk chair, but then pull out a crowbar to smash open the false bottom of my antique desk. He was hunting for the deed to my grandfather building. He thought he found the key to his new life. Instead, he found the exact tool I designed to destroy him. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner. My name is Valerie. I am 36 years old and the founder of a rapidly expanding organic skincare line. I built my company from the ground up using the old warehouse my grandfather left me. It was not easy. For the first 5 years, I worked 18-hour days mixing formulas and shipping boxes. Now my brand was on the verge of a major national franchise deal. That is why I was sitting in a luxury hotel suite in Atlanta, preparing for the biggest pitch of my life. My husband DeAndre was supposed to be supporting me. DeAndre is 38. He calls himself an investment consultant, but the truth is, he has not closed a single deal in 4 years. He lives off my company credit cards and spends his days playing golf with his arrogant white brother-in-law Connor. I had been ignoring the red flags for months, telling myself I was just too busy to be a good wife. I was reviewing my presentation when my phone vibrated across the glass table. It was Brianna. Brianna is 24 years old and my most trusted assistant. She has been with me since I was selling out of the trunk of my car. I answered the phone and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Her voice was barely a whisper. She was crying. "Valerie, you need to look at the office camera right now." Brianna sobbed quietly. "I am hiding in the supply closet." Mr. DeAndre came in after hours with Tasha. They locked the main suite door. Tasha was the 28-year-old administrative hire DeAndre had practically begged me to take on. He claimed she was a brilliant organizer who needed a break. I always felt a strange vibe from her. She wore designer clothes on a starting salary and always lingered a little too long near DeAndre when he visited the office. "Stay exactly where you are, Brianna," I told her, keeping my voice completely steady. "Do not make a sound. I am pulling up the feed." I opened the security application on my tablet. I had installed the discrete camera inside a smoke detector 2 weeks ago because small amounts of cash and inventory had been disappearing. I expected to catch a rogue delivery driver. I did not expect to witness the destruction of my marriage. The high-definition video loaded. The room was illuminated by the city's streetlights coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. There on my custom white leather executive chair was DeAndre, and on top of him was Tasha. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone across the room. A strange, freezing sensation washed over my entire body. I watched the man I had loved for 7 years, the man who swore to protect me, defiling my workspace with an entitled, smug employee. I watched them laugh and kiss. I could hear their voices perfectly through the audio feed. "We need to hurry," Tasha said, fixing her hair as she stood up. "Brianna might come back from the warehouse. I do not want that little snitch catching us. Let her come." DeAndre scoffed, adjusting his shirt. "I am the vice president of this company. I will fire her on the spot. Besides, we are about to be done with this place anyway." DeAndre walked over to the corner of the room where he had dropped a heavy canvas duffel bag. He unzipped it and pulled out a solid steel crowbar. My breath hitched in my throat. He walked straight toward my desk. It was not just any desk. It was a massive, solid mahogany piece that had belonged to my grandfather. It was the only thing I had left of the man who raised me and taught me everything about business. DeAndre ran his hands along the bottom right drawer. He knew about the false bottom. I had told him about it in confidence on our honeymoon. I told him it was where I kept my most valuable documents. "Are you sure the deed is in there?" Tasha asked nervously, stepping back as DeAndre wedged the sharp end of the crowbar into the antique wood. Connor said the buyer is ready to wire the $6 million as soon as we have the original papers. DeAndre grunted, pushing his weight against the steel bar. Once I get the power of attorney and the vault key from this desk, we take the building. I will transfer the funds to my new account, and we will leave Valerie with nothing but her stupid lotions. The sound of splitting wood echoed through the tablet speakers. It sounded like bones breaking. DeAndre drove the crowbar deeper and yanked hard. The heavy mahogany cracked and splintered, sending pieces of 70-year-old wood flying across the carpet. He destroyed my grandfather's legacy just to steal from me. He reached into the dark cavity of the broken desk and pulled out a heavy wooden box. I got it. DeAndre laughed, holding the box up like a trophy. The key to the basement vault. The deed is ours, baby. Tasha squealed and threw her arms around his neck. They celebrated their grand heist right in the middle of my ruined office. They had no idea they had just walked blindly into a trap. I knew DeAndre was getting desperate for money because I had been quietly monitoring his secret bank accounts. I knew Connor was a sleazy real estate broker looking for a quick payday. That is why the documents waiting for them in that basement vault were not real. I picked up my phone to text Brianna. Stay quiet. Let them leave. You are safe. Do not call the police. Then I dialed the number for my private attorney. The phone rang twice before he answered. Valerie, it is late, he said, sounding surprised. Is everything okay? Everything is perfectly fine. I replied, my voice as cold as absolute zero. They took the bait. They have the key. It is time to initiate phase 2. I hung up the phone and looked back at the screen. DeAndre was kissing Tasha again, holding the wooden box tightly in his hand. He thought he was a mastermind. He thought he had just won the lottery. He did not realize he had just forged his own signature on a federal prison sentence. The screen of my tablet glowed in the dark hotel room as I watched DeAndre open the small wooden box. Inside, resting on a piece of faded black velvet, was the heavy antique brass key. I turned the volume all the way up on my device. Tasha leaned in close to him, her eyes wide with greed. She asked him what the key actually opened and why it was hidden so carefully. DeAndre smiled, that arrogant, smug smile I used to find so charming when we first met. He told her it was the master key to the basement vault of my apothecary building. He explained that my grandfather built the reinforced concrete vault back in the 1970s to protect his cash and original property deeds. DeAndre set the heavy steel crowbar down on my ruined mahogany desk and pulled Tasha onto his lap right in my executive chair. He started bragging about how brilliant his master plan was. He told her all about his secret partnership with Connor. Connor is the husband of my sister-in-law, Jasmine. He is a loud, entitled white real estate broker who always acted like he was doing our family a huge favor just by marrying into it. Connor always treated me like I was just a lucky girl who inherited property instead of a smart businesswoman capable of managing a multi-million-dollar company. DeAndre told Tasha that Connor had found a phantom corporate buyer willing to pay $6 million in cash for my commercial building. The only catch was they needed the original physical deed and a signed power of attorney to bypass the corporate holding background checks. Hearing DeAndre say the number 6 million out loud made my blood run absolutely cold. The betrayal I was witnessing was no longer just about him sleeping with his young assistant. It was a calculated plot to erase my entire life work. He was actively planning to steal the generational wealth my grandfather literally bled to build for our family. He wanted to leave me entirely bankrupt while he rode off into the sunset with a woman 10 years younger than me. My grandfather bought that warehouse when nobody else wanted it. He worked 3 jobs just to afford the down payment and spent his weekends laying the brick foundation with his own bare hands. He built a safe haven for our family in a neighborhood that the city had forgotten. When he passed away, he left it entirely to me because he knew I possessed the same relentless drive he had. DeAndre knew this deep emotional history. He knew how much that brick building meant to my soul. Yet he was perfectly willing to sell my family legacy to a faceless corporation just to fund his miserable vanity projects and impress a 28-year-old girl. It was the ultimate betrayal of trust. Tasha played with his collar and asked him how they were going to get my signature on the legal power of attorney documents. DeAndre laughed a cruel, hollow sound that echoed horribly through the tablet speakers in my quiet hotel room. He told her that Connor had a connection who specialized in forging high-level legal documents. He said all they needed was the original deed from the basement vault to make the fraudulent property transfer look completely legitimate to the county clerk office. He told Tasha I was so busy traveling for my national franchise deals that I would not even notice the building was sold until the new owners pinned an eviction notice to the front glass doors of my own company. Connor was just as guilty as my husband. He married Jasmine 5 years ago and immediately tried to insert himself into every financial decision our family made. He always wore those expensive tailored suits and spoke down to me at every family gathering. He loved using big real estate buzzwords to try and confuse me. I always smiled politely and let him talk, knowing my company made more profit in 1 month than his entire brokerage firm made in a year. Now he was using his professional access to facilitate a massive crime against me. He was risking his own real estate license and his freedom just to get a cut of the $6 million. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed staring at the live video feed. My hands were perfectly steady. A few years ago, I might have broken down sobbing, wondering why my love was not enough for him. I might have called my mother-in-law Loretta, begging her to talk some sense into her son and save our marriage. But Loretta was the exact person who raised a man who believed he was entitled to everything a successful woman built. She always told DeAndre he was a king who deserved the entire world handed to him on a silver platter. Now I saw exactly what kind of king he really was in the dark. He was nothing but a common thief breaking into his wife's desk in the middle of the night to steal her future. On the screen, DeAndre put the antique brass key deep into his jacket pocket. He grabbed Tasha by the hand and told her they needed to leave the office immediately before the overnight cleaning crew arrived. I watched them walk out of my private suite, stepping carelessly over the splintered broken pieces of my grandfather's beautiful desk. The heavy suite door clicked shut behind them, leaving the room in shadows. The office was empty again, but my life was permanently altered in those few minutes. I immediately sent a text message to Brianna telling her the coast was clear and instructing her to go straight home through the back exit. I told her to act completely normal tomorrow morning and to not say a single word to anyone about the broken desk. Then I walked over to the hotel minibar and poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water. I needed to keep a perfectly clear head for what was coming next. The documents waiting for them in that basement vault were highly sensitive and completely fake. They were part of a complex legal trap my lawyer and I had set up months ago when I first noticed large amounts of money missing from our joint business accounts. I knew DeAndre was foolish and desperate to maintain his lavish lifestyle, but I did not realize he was bold enough to commit federal wire fraud and commercial real estate theft. Connor must have convinced him the illegal plan was foolproof and easy to execute. Connor always thought he was the smartest guy in the room, especially when dealing with a black woman-owned business. He probably assumed I inherited the old brick building and had absolutely no idea how commercial real estate laws and trust funds actually worked in this state. He was about to learn a very expensive and humiliating lesson. I looked at my luggage resting in the corner of the hotel room. My major franchise pitch was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, but my priorities had completely shifted in the blink of an eye. The franchise expansion could wait a few days. Protecting my empire and destroying the people trying to ruin me was the only thing that mattered right now. I opened my laptop and booked the first flight back home for the following morning. I was going to walk into my mother-in-law house for our traditional Sunday dinner and look my cheating husband straight in his lying eyes. I was going to let him think he had successfully outsmarted me. I wanted him to feel completely victorious, so he would plunge headfirst into the solid concrete wall I had built for him. I ended the call with my lawyer and placed the phone gently on the glass nightstand. I opened my messaging app and typed a quick message to Brianna. I told her to wait exactly 10 minutes before slipping out the back service door of the building. I made sure she knew to wipe her tears and act like nothing happened if anyone saw her on the street. Brianna is smart and loyal. She replied with a simple understood, and I knew she would be safe. Most women would be on the floor right now, sobbing into the hotel carpet. I thought about the 7 years I spent building a life with DeAndre. I remembered our wedding day and the promises he made in front of our families. But standing in that luxurious room, I felt absolutely nothing but a terrifying calm. The tears never came. When you build an empire from the ground up, you learn how to compartmentalize disaster. DeAndre was no longer my husband. He was a hostile takeover attempt that needed to be neutralized immediately. My attorney and I had anticipated this exact scenario. 3 months ago, I noticed a discrepancy of $40,000 in a joint operating account. When I dug deeper, I found hidden transfers to an offshore shell company. That was the moment the illusion of my marriage completely shattered. I knew DeAndre was planning something massive, but I needed to know who he was working with and how far he was willing to go. So I set the bait perfectly. The papers sitting in that concrete basement vault were practically works of art. They looked exactly like original property deeds and perfectly drafted power of attorney forms. But my lawyer had specifically designed them to trigger federal fraud alerts if anyone ever tried to file them with the county clerk. The ink used for my forged signature was laced with a specialized magnetic tracker used by federal authorities for sting operations. DeAndre and Connor thought they were stealing the keys to the kingdom. In reality, they were stealing a ticking time bomb that would destroy their entire lives. I walked over to the closet and pulled out my suitcase. I carefully folded my tailored suits and silk blouses. I was supposed to stand in a boardroom tomorrow and secure a massive franchise expansion for my brand. Instead, I was preparing for a bloodbath at my mother-in-law dining room table. I sent a brief email to the franchise investors apologizing for a sudden family emergency and requesting to reschedule our meeting. They replied immediately with their full understanding and support. When you generate the kind of revenue my company does, people are more than willing to wait for you. I checked out of the hotel before dawn while the city was still asleep. The ride to the airport was completely silent. As I sat in the first-class cabin watching the clouds roll by, I mentally reviewed every single step of my strategy. DeAndre was incredibly predictable. He would wait a few days to make sure the coast was clear before he and Connor made their actual move on the vault. That meant I had to play the role of the clueless, loving wife for just a little longer. I had to walk right into the lion's den and let them think they were the ones hunting me. Today was Sunday. That meant the entire family would be gathering at Loretta House for her weekly dinner. Loretta demanded perfect attendance from all of us. She used these Sunday dinners to assert her dominance over the family and remind everyone that she was the absolute matriarch. It was the perfect stage for the next phase of my plan. DeAndre would be there playing the dutiful son and the loving husband. Connor would be there swirling his expensive bourbon and talking down to everyone in the room. Jasmine would be there agreeing with everything her husband and mother said. And now I would be there too. The plane touched down in my home city just as the morning sun hit the tarmac. I walked through the busy terminal with my head held high. I did not go straight home to the large house DeAndre and I shared. Instead, I drove to a luxury spa downtown and spent 3 hours getting a deep tissue massage and a fresh manicure. If I was going to face a pack of wolves, I was going to look absolutely flawless doing it. I refused to let them see even a single crack in my armor. By late afternoon, I pulled my car into Loretta winding driveway. The large brick house sat at the end of a perfectly manicured lawn. I could see Connor's flashy silver sports car parked near the front door. DeAndre's sleek black sedan was parked right next to it. I took a deep breath and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. There was no trace of the betrayed wife anywhere on my face. My expression was smooth and entirely unreadable. I grabbed a bottle of expensive red wine from the passenger seat. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the heavy wooden front door. It was time to go inside and let the games begin. I pushed open the heavy front door and was immediately hit by the rich smell of roasted chicken and baked macaroni and cheese. Loretta always made sure her house smelled exactly like a magazine cover version of a perfect happy family. I walked into the grand foyer, hearing the loud sound of laughter coming from the formal dining room down the hall. DeAndre was the first one to notice my arrival. He walked out of the dining room wearing a crisp designer polo shirt and a bright smile that instantly made my stomach turn tight. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss against my cheek. He told me he missed me so much and asked how my important business trip was. He was playing the role of the devoted husband so flawlessly that I almost felt a wave of genuine applause for his sickening performance. He took my coat and gently led me into the dining room, pulling out my chair for me and pouring me a large glass of an expensive red wine. He acted completely perfect, while the vivid memory of him taking a steel crowbar to my grandfather's antique desk played on a continuous loop in my dark mind. Loretta sat at the head of the long, polished oak table surveying her kingdom. She wore a pristine silk blouse and her signature heavy string of pearls. She looked me up and down with that highly familiar expression of polite upper-class disappointment. She asked me in a sickly sweet voice if I had found the time to brush my hair before coming over to her home. She said the women in her family always made absolutely sure they looked elegant and presentable for Sunday dinner, no matter how tired they were from working all week. She then casually reminded the entire table that my grandfather was just a sweaty bricklayer from the rough side of town, and that she completely understood why I lacked certain refined social graces. Jasmine giggled loudly from across the table, taking a long sip of her expensive champagne. Jasmine was DeAndre's younger sister, and she had quite literally never worked a single day in her entire adult life. She married Connor straight out of college and made spending his commission checks her only full-time career. I did not react to Loretta insulting my beloved grandfather. I simply smiled, took a very slow sip of my red wine, and told her that my business was doing exceptionally well. Connor was sitting right next to Jasmine, scrolling aggressively through his phone, with a look of supreme importance on his pale face. Connor always treated these traditional family Sunday dinners like his own personal corporate board meetings. He wore a tailored suit jacket even though it was the weekend. He absolutely loved playing the role of the wealthy white savior who had graciously blessed our Black family with his supreme financial wisdom. He cleared his throat loudly and announced to the room that the commercial real estate market was taking a massive, devastating downturn in our city. He looked directly at me using that incredibly slow and condescending tone he reserved specifically for women who he thought were beneath him. He said he had been doing some extensive professional research on the old brick warehouse where I operated my apothecary brand. He stated with complete false authority that the neighborhood was rapidly changing and the city was about to aggressively increase property taxes on independent small business owners like myself. DeAndre nodded along eagerly, acting like a loyal puppy, agreeing with every single word Connor said. DeAndre looked at me and said that Connor was an absolute genius when it came to local property values, and that I should really listen closely to his expert advice. I kept my face perfectly blank and expressionless while I carefully sliced a piece of roasted chicken on my plate. I looked up and asked Connor exactly what kind of unsolicited advice he was offering me today. Connor smiled, a wide, predatory smile. He reached down into his expensive leather briefcase resting on the floor and pulled out a very thick stack of printed legal documents. He tossed the heavy stack of papers right onto the center of the dining table, letting them slide and land just inches away from my dinner plate. He leaned back in his wooden chair, crossing his arms over his chest with extreme smugness. He told me he had generously drawn up an official purchase agreement for my grandfather building. He said his elite brokerage firm was willing to do me a massive favor and take the heavy financial burden of that old, dilapidated warehouse completely off my hands. I looked down at the top page of the legal documents. The official purchase price, listed right there in bold black ink, was exactly $1 million. I stared at the printed numbers, feeling a wild mixture of absolute disgust and genuine dark amusement. My commercial property was recently appraised by the city at over $6 million just for the raw land value alone. They were offering me a tiny fraction of what my legacy was actually worth, hoping I was stupid and submissive enough to sign my wealth away to them legally before they had to resort to their illegal backup plan in the basement vault. Connor spoke up again, telling me $1 million was a very generous and rare offer for a dusty brick building sitting in a gentrifying neighborhood. He said the roof probably needed expensive replacing, and the old plumbing was undoubtedly a financial nightmare waiting to happen. He told me I could use that quick cash to rent a much nicer and more modern office space for my little lotion business. He actually had the nerve to use the exact words "little lotion business" to describe a thriving corporate company that was currently negotiating a massive national franchise distribution deal. Jasmine chimed in right on cue, saying it would be so incredibly nice for me to have liquid cash on hand so DeAndre could finally get the seed money to start his own private investment firm. Loretta nodded her head approvingly, stating loudly that a truly good wife always liquidates her own personal assets to support the bigger dreams of her husband. They were circling me like hungry vultures waiting for me to roll over and surrender my life work. DeAndre reached out and placed his warm hand directly over mine on the table, giving it a gentle, loving squeeze. He looked deep into my eyes with a terrifying mask of pure counterfeit concern. He told me he just wanted what was best for our future together as a married couple. He said managing a commercial property was way too much stress for a woman to handle alone, and he wanted to take that heavy burden completely off my shoulders so I could relax. I looked down at the large hand resting on top of mine. It was the exact same hand that had violently gripped a steel crowbar less than 24 hours ago to destroy my private property. It was the exact same hand that had caressed his young mistress on my executive office chair. I slowly pulled my hand out from under his grip. I picked up my white linen napkin and carefully dabbed the corners of my mouth. I looked around the table at all four of their eager, expectant faces. They genuinely believed they had cornered me in their trap. They thought bringing this insulting contract to Sunday dinner and using intense peer pressure from the family matriarch would bully me into giving up my empire. I looked down at the insulting contract again, and then back up at Connor, waiting for the silence in the room to become completely unbearable. I let the heavy silence hang in the dining room until Connor finally shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I pushed the thick stack of legal papers back across the polished oak table right toward his chest. I told him my answer was absolutely no. I did not raise my voice or show any emotion. I just stated it as a simple, indisputable fact. Connor's face turned a pale shade of red. He was clearly not used to being told no, especially by a black woman sitting at his mother-in-law dining table. He let out a harsh, patronizing laugh and shook his head like I was a stubborn, naive child who did not understand basic mathematics. He leaned forward and placed both of his hands flat on the table, attempting to physically dominate the space. He started explaining commercial real estate zoning laws using a slow, exaggerated voice. He told me the city was rezoning my district for high-density residential development and that my grandfather's old brick warehouse was going to become a massive financial liability overnight. He threw around heavy words like environmental impact studies, structural depreciation, and catastrophic code violations. He said I was just a woman making little beauty products, and I had absolutely no capacity to comprehend the aggressive legal changes coming to the commercial property market. He told me I was completely out of my depth, and that managing commercial real estate required a sophisticated masculine intellect. He said if I did not sell the building to him today, the city inspectors would eventually condemn the property and leave me with a completely worthless pile of bricks. He laughed and said he was practically doing charity work by offering me $1 million for such a massive headache. He said I should just take the cash and go buy myself a nice little storefront in a cheaper zip code where I belonged. Loretta slammed her crystal water glass down onto the table so hard the water spilled over the gold rim. Her eyes were flashing with absolute fury. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face and told me I was being incredibly selfish and foolish. She said DeAndre was a brilliant financial mind who had been patiently waiting for the right opportunity to launch his own investment firm. She demanded to know what kind of woman hoards a useless piece of property while her own husband struggles to build his career. She told me a real wife makes sacrifices for the man she loves and elevates her family name instead of clinging to the dusty past. She said she had warned DeAndre not to marry a woman from a working-class background because people like me never understood how to build true generational wealth. She told me I was completely ruining her son life by keeping him tethered to my stagnant little business. She said the entire community was laughing at DeAndre because his wife refused to step aside and let him be the man of the house. She demanded that I pick up a pen and sign the contract right this minute if I wanted to remain a welcomed member of her family. Jasmine was incredibly quick to follow her mother lead. She crossed her arms tightly and glared at me across the table. She said I had always been entirely obsessed with my own independence and that I never truly integrated into their family structure. She reminded me that her brother had given me the best years of his life and that I owed him my unwavering financial support. She whined that DeAndre needed this $1 million of seed money right now so he could finally secure an office in the financial district and sit at the same table as the major corporate players. She accused me of trying to emasculate my husband by being more financially successful than him. She said it was disgusting and unnatural for a wife to hold that much financial power over the head of her own household. Jasmine claimed that my business only gained traction because people associated me with the prestigious Jackson family name and that I was acting like a greedy commoner trying to hoard a building I did not even know how to properly manage. DeAndre just sat there staring down at his plate, playing the role of the wounded, devoted husband perfectly. He let out a long, heavy sigh and looked up at me with those sad brown eyes that used to make my heart completely melt. He told me he thought we were supposed to be a team. He said he had supported my crazy dreams when I was mixing lotions in a dusty warehouse, and he could not understand why I refused to support his dreams now. He whispered that it felt like a knife in his back that I did not trust him to multiply our wealth. He told me he was trying to build a legacy for our future children and that my stubbornness was destroying our family foundation. The sheer audacity of him talking about knives in backs and family foundations while he had physically broken into my private desk just hours ago with his young mistress made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. They were running a highly coordinated psychological attack on me right there in the middle of Sunday dinner. They were using every single toxic family dynamic they had perfected over the years to break my spirit and force my compliance. Any normal person would have cracked under the weight of that concentrated guilt and manipulation. They expected me to start crying, or to start defending my intelligence, or to apologize for making Connor feel disrespected. They expected me to cave under the heavy glare of Loretta disapproval and sign away the only thing my grandfather had left me. But I was not the same naive girl who married into this family 7 years ago. I was a self-made millionaire who had built an empire through pure grit and relentless determination. I looked at the four of them sitting around that expensive oak table. They were nothing but parasites dressed in designer clothing. They consumed everything they touched and demanded gratitude for the privilege of being eaten alive. I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over me. I was completely done trying to prove my worth to people who only saw me as a walking automated teller machine. I listened to them hurl their insults and their demands while I slowly finished cutting the roasted chicken on my plate. I took a bite and chewed it methodically, refusing to let them see even a single ounce of fear or intimidation. Connor was still rambling about tax codes, trying desperately to reassert his dominance over the conversation. Loretta was breathing heavily, glaring at me like I was a disease infecting her perfect family. Jasmine was rolling her eyes, waiting for me to surrender. And DeAndre was just waiting for his payday so he could go back to the hotel and celebrate with Tasha. They were all so blinded by their own greed and arrogance that they could not see the massive cliff I was leading them toward. They thought they were backing me into a corner, but they did not realize they had just willingly walked into the slaughterhouse and handed me the locks to the door. I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate with a soft clink that made everyone jump slightly. I wiped my hands on the white linen napkin and let my eyes lock onto DeAndre. I was ready to drop the first subtle bomb on their perfect Sunday dinner and cut off his financial oxygen supply immediately. I reached into my designer handbag, resting on the floor by my feet, and pulled out my smartphone. I placed the device flat on the polished oak table right next to Connor insulting million-dollar real estate contract. I looked directly at DeAndre, who was still wearing his pathetic wounded puppy expression, playing the role of the devoted husband who was just trying to build a future for our family. I kept my voice incredibly soft and perfectly steady as I asked him if he was truly struggling that badly to find seed money for his highly anticipated investment firm. He nodded enthusiastically, leaning forward in his chair. He genuinely thought I was finally starting to see reason, and that his intense psychological manipulation was actually working on me. He thought I was about to cave to the family pressure and hand over the rights to my grandfather building. I unlocked my phone screen and opened my corporate banking application. I told the entire table that I found it incredibly confusing how a brilliant financial mind like DeAndre could be so terribly strapped for cash while simultaneously living such an extravagant lifestyle. I tapped the screen and navigated directly to the joint business expense account. This was the specific account I had foolishly given him access to 3 years ago when he claimed he desperately needed a corporate card to entertain potential venture capital investors. I began reading his recent transaction history out loud, making sure my voice carried clearly over the quiet dining room. I read off a $2,000 charge at an exclusive downtown steakhouse from last Tuesday evening. I read off an $800 charge for premium floor seats at a professional basketball game from Thursday night. I also read off a massive $4,000 charge for a weekend stay at a luxury spa resort located 2 towns over. I paused for a brief moment and looked right at DeAndre, asking him if those expensive steaks and romantic resort getaways were a necessary part of his rigorous corporate strategy. His fake smile began to slip just a fraction of an inch, but he maintained his silence, staring intensely at his plate of cold roasted chicken. Connor scoffed loudly and crossed his arms over his tailored suit jacket. He told me that closing massive corporate deals required taking elite clients out for premium entertainment, and that I simply did not understand the aggressive nature of high-stakes networking. I nodded my head slowly, pretending to completely agree with Connor's profound financial wisdom. Then I scrolled down my phone screen to the largest pending transaction from yesterday afternoon. I read the transaction amount out loud, letting the massive number hang heavily in the air. $20,500. I announced the merchant name loud and clear. It was the flagship Hermes boutique located in the most expensive luxury shopping district in the city. The entire dining table fell completely silent for several long seconds. Jasmine actually choked slightly on her expensive champagne, coughing into her white linen napkin. Connor uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, staring blankly at my phone screen as if the numbers might magically disappear. I looked directly into DeAndre's lying eyes and asked him what kind of corporate investment required a $20,000 luxury designer handbag. I asked him if he was planning to store his brilliant business proposals inside a bright orange leather purse. I told him I certainly had not received any expensive gifts from him lately, so I was deeply curious about which vital corporate client required such an incredibly intimate and expensive offering. DeAndre swallowed hard, and a thin bead of cold sweat formed on his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. He looked desperately over at his mother for help, looking exactly like a little boy who had just been caught stealing money from a cash register. Loretta immediately sprang into action to protect her precious golden child. She slammed her hand flat against the oak table, causing the crystal water glasses to shake. She completely bypassed the blatant evidence of his financial infidelity and started defending the absolutely indefensible. She told me to stop interrogating my husband over complex business expenses that I simply could not understand. She puffed up her chest and loudly declared that a man in business needs to network and keep up appearances at all costs. She said perception is absolute reality in the corporate world, and that DeAndre needed to project massive wealth if he ever wanted to attract elite high-net-worth investors to his new firm. She completely ignored the obvious fact that he was projecting this fake wealth using the hard-earned money I generated from the skincare business she constantly belittled and mocked. Loretta continued her ridiculous tirade without taking a single breath. She claimed that buying extravagant luxury items was a highly sophisticated networking tactic designed to show dominance in the marketplace. She said elite clients only trust financial advisors who look and act like they are already wildly successful millionaires. She told me I was completely embarrassing myself by penny pinching and making a massive scene over a single credit card swipe. She said women from my blue-collar background always possess a damaging poverty mindset, and that is exactly why I would never reach the highest levels of elite society. She demanded that I put my phone away immediately and apologized to DeAndre for questioning his financial expertise in front of his entire family. Jasmine quickly nodded her head in eager agreement with her mother's toxic logic. She wiped her mouth and said DeAndre was probably buying high-end corporate gifts for the wives of wealthy venture capitalists to secure their business loyalty. She told me I should be incredibly proud of my husband for being so forward-thinking and strategic with his networking budget. Connor leaned back in his chair, recovering from his initial shock. He adjusted his expensive tie and told me that 20 grand was absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of commercial real estate acquisitions. He said if I just acted like a supportive wife and signed the $1 million property contract right now, DeAndre could easily cover all of his outstanding corporate expenses and finally launch his financial empire. I sat there in the dining room listening to their collective delusions spinning out of control. They were quite literally twisting reality to justify my husband stealing $20,000 from my company accounts to buy a designer handbag for his 28-year-old mistress. They were so deeply committed to the false narrative of DeAndre being a misunderstood business genius that they were perfectly willing to excuse massive blatant financial abuse right to my face. Loretta was staring at me with a look of supreme triumph and arrogant authority. She honestly believed her ridiculous explanation had successfully put me back in my designated place. She thought I was going to lower my head, accept her absurd justification, and sign away my grandfather legacy just to keep the fragile family peace. She had absolutely no idea that I was just getting warmed up and that the real punishment was about to begin. I looked right back into the arrogant eyes of Loretta and let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I did not yell or scream or throw my water glass against the wall. Instead, I picked my smartphone right back up from the polished oak table. I unlocked the screen and opened my contacts list. I tapped the number for the executive VIP service line at my corporate bank. I pressed the speakerphone button and set the device right in the middle of the table next to the ridiculous $1 million real estate contract Connor had drawn up. The phone rang twice loudly in the silent dining room. A polite customer service representative answered, asking how he could assist the primary account holder today. The eyes of DeAndre suddenly went wide with genuine panic. He realized exactly what I was about to do, but he was too frozen by his own cowardice to physically stop me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and spoke very clearly into the microphone. I told the representative my full name and provided my secure executive PIN code for instant verification. Jasmine let out a small gasp and sat back in her chair, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Loretta opened her mouth to shout something, but I raised my hand and pointed a single warning finger at her, forcing her to keep quiet. The bank representative verified my identity and asked how he could help me. I told him I needed to immediately freeze and permanently cancel all supplementary credit cards attached to my primary corporate account. I specifically told him to cancel the platinum card, ending in 4 different numbers, which I read aloud slowly. I stated very clearly that the secondary cardholder, DeAndre Jackson, was no longer authorized to make any purchases or access any funds from my business or personal accounts effective immediately. DeAndre reached his hand across the table, trying to grab the phone, but I quickly slid it out of his reach. I looked him dead in the eyes and told him if he touched my property, I would have him arrested for theft right in front of his precious mother. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if the table had suddenly caught fire. His entire face drained of color, leaving him looking like a terrified little boy. The bank representative typed quickly on his keyboard, and the loud clicking sound echoed through the dining room. He confirmed over the speakerphone that all supplementary cards were now officially frozen and that DeAndre Jackson had zero access to any of my financial assets. I thanked the representative politely and ended the call. The click of the phone hanging up sounded like a heavy steel door slamming shut on the comfortable fake life of my cheating husband. The face of Loretta turned a dark shade of purple. She pushed her chair back and stood up, towering over the end of the dining table. She told me I was a petty, vindictive woman who was destroying her own marriage over a simple misunderstanding. She demanded I call the bank right back and restore the financial access of her son before he suffered any humiliation in the corporate world. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my designer dress. I looked at Loretta and told her that her brilliant, successful son could use his own massive intellect to fund his lifestyle from now on. I told her since he was such a genius networking expert, he should have no problem paying for his own steak dinners and luxury resort vacations. I looked at Jasmine and Connor, who were both staring at me in complete stunned silence. Connor was no longer leaning back with that smug, confident posture. He was sitting completely rigid, realizing that the easy money pipeline he was banking on was rapidly drying up. Jasmine tried to speak up, telling me I was making a huge mistake and that I would regret turning my back on family. I looked right at her and told her the only mistake I ever made was funding the lazy lifestyle of her brother for 7 long years. I picked up my phone and my expensive leather handbag. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents Connor had so generously provided. I picked up the contract and flipped through the thick, crisp pages. I told Connor the evaluation he made of my property was almost as pathetic as his choice in a brother-in-law. I dropped the heavy stack of papers right into the center of the roasted chicken dish on the table. The thick brown gravy soaked immediately into the legal paper, ruining his entire arrogant presentation. I turned my attention back to DeAndre, who was staring at his deactivated platinum card sitting uselessly next to his dinner plate. I told him he had exactly 1 hour to pack whatever cheap clothes he owned and get out of my house. I told him he could take his $20,000 orange purse and go sleep in his sleek black sedan because my doors were now permanently locked to him forever. I did not wait for his pathetic response or for the inevitable screaming fit from his mother. I turned my back on the entire toxic family and walked out of the formal dining room. My heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, echoing through the large, quiet hallway. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the cool evening air, leaving the stifling smell of roasted chicken and fake family loyalty behind me. I walked down the long, winding driveway toward my car, feeling lighter than I had felt in 7 long years. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I allowed myself to fully appreciate the tactical beauty of what I had just done. I did not just cut off the allowance of DeAndre out of pure anger or spite. I did it because it was a necessary, calculated move to accelerate my ultimate trap. DeAndre was currently drowning in secret debt, and now he had absolutely zero access to my money. The panic would set in immediately. He would not be able to buy his mistress expensive gifts or pay for his fake luxury lifestyle. He was officially backed into a desperate corner with no way out. He needed a massive influx of cash right now, and the only way he could get it was to sell the building my grandfather left me. By cutting his financial lifeline, I was forcing him to fast-track his illegal heist. He and Connor would have to execute their plan to raid the basement vault immediately before the entire fake world of DeAndre completely collapsed. They thought they were the ones controlling the timeline of this real estate theft. They had absolutely no idea I was the one holding the stopwatch and pulling every single string from the dark. I drove away from the brick house knowing the final phase of my sweet revenge was about to begin. I drove back to my house feeling a profound sense of total silence. The massive property felt entirely different without the constant suffocating presence of DeAndre. I walked into the grand living room and did not bother turning on any of the main lights. I simply walked over to the large leather sofa and sat down in the absolute dark. I did not feel lonely or afraid. I felt like a general sitting on a quiet battlefield waiting for the enemy to make their final fatal mistake. I knew DeAndre was out there somewhere in the city completely panicking. He had no access to cash and his pride was deeply wounded. He needed to prove to himself and to his arrogant brother-in-law that he was still the man in charge. I poured myself a small glass of sparkling water and set my phone face up on the glass coffee table right in front of me. The digital clock on the wall slowly ticked past midnight. The entire neighborhood was completely asleep, but my eyes were wide open. Right at 12:15 in the morning, the bright screen of my phone suddenly illuminated the dark room. A silent red notification banner appeared across the glass display. It was a high-priority alert from the advanced motion sensors I had secretly installed in the back alley of my commercial building. I reached out and picked up the device, feeling my heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. I opened the encrypted security application and tapped on the live video feed for the exterior loading dock. The high-definition night vision camera immediately displayed two shadowy figures creeping nervously down the narrow brick alleyway. I zoomed in on the screen and clearly recognized the faces of my cheating husband and his incredibly arrogant real estate partner. Connor was wearing a completely ridiculous black turtleneck sweater and dark denim jeans, clearly trying to look like a professional stealth burglar. He looked completely out of place and highly uncomfortable creeping around an industrial urban neighborhood in the middle of the night. DeAndre was walking closely behind him, looking absolutely terrified and sweating profusely, even though the night air was completely cool. They were whispering furiously to each other as they approached the heavy steel service door located at the very back of the old brick warehouse. I switched the audio feed on and turned the volume up. I could hear their frantic, heavy breathing through the sensitive, hidden microphones. Connor aggressively whispered at DeAndre, telling him to hurry up and unlock the door before a random police patrol car drove past the alley. DeAndre reached into the pocket of his dark jacket with shaking hands and pulled out the antique brass key he had stolen from my broken mahogany desk. He fumbled with the heavy metal key for a few long, agonizing seconds before finally sliding it into the old mechanical deadbolt. The heavy internal tumblers clicked loudly, and the thick steel door slowly groaned open. They slipped inside the dark building and pulled the heavy door shut behind them, sealing themselves inside my trap. I quickly switched my phone screen to the internal basement camera feed. The deep concrete basement was the most secure area of the entire building. My grandfather had reinforced the thick brick walls with solid steel beams decades ago to protect his most valuable business assets. The screen showed the two men walking slowly down the creaky wooden staircase, illuminating the dusty darkness with the bright flashlights on their smartphones. Connor covered his nose and mouth with his hand, complaining loudly about the damp smell of old concrete and stagnant air. He told DeAndre he could not wait to bulldoze this entire worthless structure and turn it into a profitable generic apartment complex. Hearing him talk so casually about destroying the beautiful legacy of my grandfather did not make me angry anymore. It only made the incoming absolute destruction of his career feel that much more satisfying. They reached the bottom of the long staircase and walked directly toward the back wall of the vast basement. This was where the hidden, reinforced concrete vault was located, behind a secondary iron gate. DeAndre used the exact same antique brass key to unlock the heavy padlock, securing the rusty iron bars. He pulled the gate open, and they both stepped inside the small, enclosed vault space. Resting alone on top of a sturdy wooden table was a heavy, fireproof steel lockbox. DeAndre set his phone down on the table so the flashlight beam illuminated the box perfectly. He reached out and flipped the metal latches open with trembling fingers. Connor leaned in extremely close, practically pushing DeAndre out of the way in his overwhelming greed. Inside the box sat the thick stack of beautiful legal documents my private attorney had so carefully designed. Connor eagerly snatched the crisp papers out of the dark box. He shined his bright light directly onto the very top page of the stack. I listened through the audio feed as he read the bold legal header out loud to DeAndre. He confirmed it was the absolute, irrevocable power of attorney and the original notarized deed of trust for the commercial property. He flipped quickly to the final signature page of the heavy document. He traced his pale finger directly over the blue ink of my forged signature. A loud, obnoxious bark of laughter erupted from the mouth of Connor, echoing wildly against the hard concrete walls of the basement. He slapped DeAndre hard on the shoulder and told him the legal documents were absolutely flawless. He said the county clerk office would process the property transfer without asking a single question because the paperwork looked completely legitimate. He called DeAndre a brilliant mastermind for finding the hidden key and executing the perfect corporate heist. DeAndre let out a massive sigh of relief, and a huge, arrogant smile spread across his sweating face. DeAndre looked down at the fake documents and laughed a cruel, hollow laugh. He told Connor that my decision to cut off his credit cards at Sunday dinner was the most pathetic and stupid mistake I could have ever possibly made. He actually bragged that I forced his hand and that I fully deserved to lose my entire multi-million-dollar property because I disrespected his authority as the man of the house. He said he was going to take his half of the $6 million and buy a massive luxury penthouse downtown where he and Tasha could live like absolute royalty while I went completely bankrupt. They stood there in the dark basement, celebrating their massive fake victory and high-fiving each other like immature college boys. Connor carefully folded the thick stack of fraudulent legal documents and shoved them deep inside the interior pocket of his expensive jacket. He told DeAndre they needed to get out of the building immediately and go get some sleep. He said he was going to contact the phantom corporate buyer first thing in the morning to finalize the massive cash transaction and secure their wire transfer. They turned their phone flashlights back on and made their way out of the concrete vault. They walked back up the wooden stairs and quietly exited through the heavy steel service door, making sure to lock it perfectly behind them. I watched the exterior camera feed as they walked back down the dark alleyway and disappeared into the night. They were completely unaware that the blue ink on those documents was laced with a highly classified magnetic tracking compound used exclusively by federal authorities. They had absolutely no idea they were carrying a federal felony conviction right inside their jacket pocket. I locked the screen of my smartphone and set it down gently on the glass coffee table. A deep, profound feeling of total victory washed over my entire soul. They thought they were holding all the winning cards in this high-stakes game of real estate deception. They did not know the game was already over, and they had just willingly signed their own complete destruction. The morning sun rose over the city, bringing a false sense of normalcy to the day. I drove to my corporate office feeling completely rested and highly focused. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors of my company lobby, I immediately noticed the strange, tense atmosphere. The receptionist refused to meet my eyes, and several employees were whispering near the break room. I walked directly down the main hallway toward my executive suite. That is when I heard the loud, arrogant voice of my husband echoing through the open office doors. DeAndre was standing right in the middle of the administrative bullpen, wearing a sharp, tailored suit and holding a clipboard like he actually owned the place. Standing directly across from him was my loyal assistant, Brianna. She was holding a small cardboard box filled with her personal desk items. Her face was flushed red, and she was biting her lower lip to keep from crying. DeAndre was using his ceremonial vice president title to publicly terminate her employment. I had given him that meaningless title years ago, purely to stroke his fragile male ego. Now, he was using it to humiliate the hardest working woman in my entire building. He told Brianna she was being let go due to corporate restructuring and gross insubordination. He spoke to her like she was absolute trash, while the rest of my staff watched in stunned silence. Then I saw the ultimate insult. Standing right behind DeAndre was Tasha. She had a smug, arrogant smirk plastered across her young face. She was holding a fresh cup of gourmet coffee and surveying the office like she had just been crowned queen. But what made my blood truly run cold was the coat she was wearing. It was my custom-tailored cashmere winter coat, the exact same designer coat I had accidentally left hanging in my office closet before my business trip to Atlanta. She had the absolute audacity to wear my personal clothing right inside my own company headquarters. She saw me walking down the hallway and her smirk grew even wider. She leaned into DeAndre and whispered something in his ear. DeAndre turned around and saw me standing there. He puffed out his chest, expecting a massive, explosive fight. He wanted me to scream and yell in front of the entire staff so he could call me hysterical and unstable. He wanted to justify his terrible actions by making me look like a crazy, jealous wife. But I completely refused to give him that satisfaction. I remembered the heavy stack of fake legal documents resting in his jacket pocket. I needed him to feel completely invincible for just a little while longer, so I let my shoulders slump forward and I completely dropped my confident posture. I looked down at the floor, acting like a totally defeated, broken woman who had finally given up the fight. I walked past them without saying a single word. I did not defend Brianna, and I did not demand my cashmere coat back from his 28-year-old mistress. I simply walked into my ruined office and softly closed the door behind me. I heard DeAndre laugh loudly in the hallway, telling Tasha that he finally had the entire company under his absolute control. He actually believed my silence was a total surrender. He thought the heavy family pressure from his mother and the reality of my failing marriage had finally broken my spirit. He immediately promoted Tasha to the position of senior executive administrator and gave her the master access codes to the building. I sat alone in my office for exactly 1 hour, listening to them celebrate their fake victory outside my door. Then I quietly packed my laptop and left the building through the private rear exit. I drove my car across the city to a small, quiet coffee shop located far away from the corporate district. I walked into the back corner booth where Brianna was already sitting and waiting for me. She looked up from her coffee cup with red, swollen eyes. She had played her part absolutely perfectly. We had briefly discussed this exact scenario through secure text messages earlier that morning. I slid into the booth across from her and pushed a thick white envelope across the wooden table. Inside the envelope was a cashier check for $50,000. It was a massive secret severance package and a quiet bonus for her unwavering loyalty. Brianna opened the envelope and gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. I told her to wipe her tears because we had an incredible amount of highly confidential work to do. I explained to her that getting officially fired by DeAndre was the very first step in our new corporate strategy. I needed her entirely off the company payroll so she could operate completely undetected in the shadows. I told her I was promoting her to the role of chief executive director of a brand new enterprise. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened a secure legal portal. I showed Brianna the incorporation documents my attorney had prepared early that morning. We were officially establishing a highly anonymous shell company called Apex Holdings LLC. We registered the new corporation in the state of Delaware, where corporate privacy laws are incredibly strict and ownership records are completely shielded from public view. I explained the master plan to Brianna while she sipped her coffee and listened with absolute intense focus. I needed a trusted proxy to act as the official corporate representative for Apex Holdings, because my name could not be attached to it anywhere. I told Brianna that her new full-time job was to act as the phantom corporate buyer for my grandfather building. Connor and DeAndre thought they had successfully found a massive real estate investment firm willing to pay $6 million in pure cash for the stolen property. They had absolutely no idea that the mysterious buyer they were desperately communicating with was actually my 24-year-old assistant sitting in a quiet coffee shop. I instructed Brianna on exactly how to communicate with Connor using a disguised corporate email address and a virtual private phone number. I told her to act like a ruthless, high-level corporate negotiator. She needed to demand aggressive timelines and insist on an immediate cash closing to push their greedy panic to the absolute limit. Brianna smiled a wide, dangerous smile and put the thick envelope into her purse. She completely understood the assignment. She was no longer just an administrative assistant. She was the primary architect of their incoming destruction. We spent the next 3 hours mapping out every single detail of the fake real estate acquisition. We drafted official emails to Connor requesting immediate confirmation of the property deed and the power of attorney documents. We knew they had the forged papers sitting right in their possession after their midnight basement infiltration. Now we were actively demanding they present those fake documents to close the multi-million-dollar deal. I left the coffee shop feeling an intense rush of pure adrenaline. DeAndre and Tasha were currently sitting in my office playing house and wearing my clothes. They thought they had successfully pushed me entirely out of my own life. They thought they had secured their perfect, rich future. But while they were busy celebrating their petty little theft, I was quietly building a massive legal guillotine right above their heads. Apex Holdings was officially active, and the phantom buyer was fully ready to engage. Connor was about to get the exact phone call he had been waiting for, and he was going to walk his entire family right off the edge of a massive legal cliff. Later that same afternoon, Brianna sent the first official corporate email from the highly secure Apex Holdings server. She addressed the message directly to Connor, using the exact aggressive legal jargon my private attorney had spent hours perfecting. She stated that her mysterious investment board was incredibly eager to acquire the commercial property, but they required immediate visual proof of the original deed and the power of attorney. She also added a brilliant calculated detail stating that the $6 million cash wire transfer would take exactly 7 business days to completely clear international corporate escrow. 7 days was a massive, devastating problem for DeAndre. I had completely frozen his financial access and his secret bank accounts were entirely drained. He was currently sitting in my executive office, trying desperately to impress his young mistress with absolutely $0 to his name. He could not wait 7 days to get paid. He needed a massive influx of cash immediately to keep up the grand illusion of his wealth and to fund the extravagant, lavish lifestyle he had promised Tasha. Connor received the email from the phantom buyer and immediately panicked as well. He knew DeAndre was entirely broke and acting highly unpredictable. Connor needed to keep DeAndre happy and cooperative until the final sale closed. So Connor reached deep into his darkest professional network. In the sleazy criminal underbelly of the commercial real estate world, there are ruthless private lenders who operate completely outside the strict boundaries of traditional banking laws. They are dangerous men who provide massive amounts of unregulated hard money to desperate individuals willing to put up highly valuable property collateral. Early the next morning, Connor and DeAndre drove to a heavily guarded, windowless office building located deep in the industrial district. They walked into a dark room and sat across from a man who did not care about their low credit scores or their lack of corporate history. He only cared about the physical collateral they were offering. Connor proudly placed the stolen forged documents right onto the cold metal desk. He presented the fake deed and the fraudulent power of attorney bearing my specially tracked signature. Connor confidently told the private lender they needed a fast cash loan of $3 million, and they promised to pay it back in exactly 1 week with a massive $500,000 interest fee once their pending corporate sale finalized. The shady private lender inspected the thick stack of documents. Because my attorney had made the fake papers look absolutely pristine, the lender accepted them without initiating a standard federal background check. He saw a prime commercial building worth well over $6 million being offered as a direct guarantee for a $3 million short-term loan. It was a completely predatory financial setup. The lender knew if they defaulted, he could legally seize the entire multi-million-dollar building for half its actual value. He approved the illegal hard money loan right on the spot. Connor and DeAndre eagerly signed the binding financial contracts offering the sacred legacy of my grandfather to a highly dangerous criminal enterprise. Within 3 short hours, a massive wire transfer of $3 million hit a brand new offshore bank account Connor had quickly established. They had just pulled off exactly what they thought was the ultimate flawless financial crime. DeAndre suddenly had access to millions in liquid cash. He felt like an absolute invincible god walking among ordinary mortals. He immediately transferred a huge portion of the stolen loan funds directly into his own personal checking account. He did not use the money to invest or to build a legitimate, respectable business. His overwhelming vanity and crippling insecurity took complete control of his brain. He took Tasha directly to the most expensive diamond district in the city that very same afternoon. He purchased a massive, ridiculous diamond engagement ring to prove his complete dominance and immense wealth to her. He bought a brand new luxury sports car, paying in pure cash. He and Connor spent the entire evening drinking $1,000 bottles of champagne at an exclusive underground club, celebrating their absolute criminal genius. But DeAndre was not satisfied with just stealing my commercial building. His fragile, bruised ego demanded that he completely destroy my life and take over my entire company as well. He loudly told Connor they were going to use the remaining cash from the shady loan to force a hostile, aggressive buyout of my apothecary brand. He wanted to serve me with divorce papers and a humiliating lowball corporate buyout offer on the exact same day. He wanted to watch me lose my grandfather building my highly successful company and my marriage all at exactly the same time. He wanted me completely broken and begging him for mercy. While they were busy popping expensive champagne and spending stolen, unregulated loan money, I was sitting quietly in my comfortable living room, monitoring the public property registry. My private attorney called me late that evening with an absolutely incredible update. He told me a massive private financial lien had just been officially filed against the fake deed of my building. We had successfully caught them committing a completely new layer of devastating federal crimes. By pledging a commercial property they did not legally own to a private financial institution, using forged legal documents transmitted across state lines, they had just committed aggressive federal wire fraud and severe federal mortgage fraud. They thought the $3 million was their golden ticket to absolute freedom. They thought they were playing a brilliant, flawless game of corporate chess against a naive, emotional wife. They had absolutely no idea that the money they were spending so freely was tied directly to a highly radioactive fake asset. They had just invited a ruthless black market lender right into the dead center of a highly classified federal sting operation. They were digging their own graves so incredibly fast, the steel shovels were practically catching fire. Every single dollar DeAndre spent on his young, ignorant mistress was adding another solid, unavoidable year to his impending federal prison sentence. I poured myself a warm cup of herbal tea and smiled at the glowing screen of my laptop. They were completely funded, completely arrogant, and completely doomed. The very next morning, Connor sat in his lavish office at his real estate brokerage. He was nursing a slight hangover from his expensive underground club celebration, but his greed kept him highly motivated. He opened his encrypted email client and attached the high-resolution scanned copies of the forged deed and the fraudulent power of attorney. He sent the heavy digital file directly to the secure email address of Apex Holdings. He typed out a highly arrogant message demanding that the mysterious investment board review the documents immediately and finalize the $6 million purchase agreement. He actually believed he was putting aggressive corporate pressure on a massive institutional buyer. He had no idea he was simply sending a digital confession of his federal crimes straight to my 24-year-old assistant. Brianna was sitting across town in her quiet apartment drinking a green smoothie when the email notification popped up on her screen. She immediately forwarded the scanned documents to my private attorney so he could officially log the wire fraud evidence into our growing legal file. Then she drafted the perfect corporate response. She used sophisticated corporate language, stating that the board of directors at Apex Holdings had thoroughly reviewed the attached legal documents. She wrote that the board was completely satisfied with the chain of title and the power of attorney. Then she delivered the ultimate golden hook. She stated that Apex Holdings was prepared to offer the full $6 million asking price with absolutely no inspection contingencies and no financing delays. It was a pure cash offer designed to close in less than 5 days. When Connor read that email, his heart must have almost exploded in his chest. In the real estate world, a no-contingency cash offer for a commercial building is the ultimate unicorn. It simply does not happen unless the buyer is incredibly desperate or completely foolish. Connor did not stop to question why a massive corporate entity would hand over $6 million without demanding a single environmental study or a structural building inspection. His overwhelming arrogance completely blinded him to the massive, glaring red flags. He truly believed his superior negotiation skills had successfully cornered the investment board. He picked up his phone and immediately called DeAndre to deliver the incredible news. DeAndre was busy driving his newly purchased luxury sports car down the highway with Tasha sitting in the passenger seat when Connor called. I know this because DeAndre was careless enough to post a public video on his social media account showing off his new leather steering wheel while bragging about his incoming massive payday. When Connor told him the phantom buyer had accepted the $6 million price with zero contingencies, DeAndre started screaming with joy. He told Tasha they were about to be multimillionaires by the end of the week. He praised Connor, calling him a real estate mastermind and the greatest brother-in-law in the entire world. They agreed to meet at a highly exclusive country club for an expensive steak lunch to celebrate their absolute genius. While they were sitting at a white tablecloth eating premium cuts of meat and drinking expensive scotch, they spent hours mocking my intelligence. Connor laughed and told DeAndre that women like me simply do not have the intellectual capacity to understand high-level corporate finance. He said I was probably sitting at home crying over my lost business while they were out moving massive mountains of cash. DeAndre eagerly agreed, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He bragged that taking my building was the easiest thing he had ever done. He said he was going to use his half of the remaining $3 million to officially launch his elite investment firm and completely destroy my apothecary brand just for fun. They mapped out exactly how the money would be divided. They would use the first $3 million to immediately pay off the dangerous black market lender and cover the massive interest fee. That would leave them with nearly $2.5 million in pure profit to split between them. Connor planned to use his cut to buy out his senior partners at the brokerage firm and take total control of the company. DeAndre planned to rent the most expensive penthouse in the city and live out his ultimate fantasy as a corporate kingpin. They clinked their heavy crystal glasses together, toasting to their brilliant future and their flawless execution. They were so completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance that they never once bothered to look beneath the surface. They never hired an independent title company to verify the Apex Holdings corporate structure. They never questioned why my signature on the power of attorney looked almost too perfect. They were running full speed toward the finish line, completely unaware that the finish line was actually the edge of a massive bottomless cliff. Later that afternoon, Brianna sent the final required email. It was the official digital purchase agreement ready for their physical signatures. She instructed Connor that the mysterious investment board required a formal in-person signing ceremony to finalize the massive cash transfer. She told him the board representatives would meet them at a location of their choosing to execute the final documents and release the $6 million from corporate escrow. Connor replied within 2 minutes, completely taking the bait. He proposed they host the signing at the most expensive fine dining restaurant in the financial district to give the transaction an air of absolute high-class legitimacy. I sat in my home office reading the email thread Brianna had forwarded to me. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The hook was not just set, it was swallowed completely whole. DeAndre and Connor had actively chosen the exact time and place of their own public execution. They wanted a fancy restaurant filled with wealthy patrons to witness their grand corporate triumph. I was more than happy to give them an audience. I picked up my phone and called my private attorney, telling him to clear his schedule for the upcoming signing party. Then I called the federal field office to confirm our timeline with the agents working our fraud case. The trap was fully loaded and the rats were practically begging for the cheese. I sat alone in the quiet living room, listening to the sound of a loud engine roaring up my long private driveway. I stood up and walked over to the large front window. A bright red luxury sports car parked aggressively right on the pristine front grass. DeAndre stepped out of the driver's seat wearing a ridiculous designer tracksuit he had clearly just purchased with his stolen loan money. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Tasha stepped out wearing dark designer sunglasses and carrying the $20,000 orange purse my husband had bought with my corporate funds. A second car pulled up immediately behind the red sports car. It was my mother-in-law, Loretta. She got out of her dark sedan carrying a massive bouquet of expensive flowers and a large blue gift bag. She rushed over to Tasha and wrapped her arms tightly around the young mistress. Loretta rubbed the completely flat stomach of Tasha and smiled brighter than I had ever seen her smile before. The sickening realization hit me like a physical blow. Tasha was pregnant, and Loretta was absolutely thrilled to welcome the mother of her new grandson into the family. I walked back to the center of the living room and waited for them to enter. DeAndre kicked the heavy front door open without even turning the brass handle properly. He walked into my house acting like a conquering king returning from a victorious battle. Tasha walked in right behind him, looking around the grand foyer with greedy, wide eyes. Loretta followed them inside, glaring at me with a look of pure venom and absolute triumph. She wanted me to feel as small and as worthless as possible. DeAndre did not even bother saying hello to me. He reached inside his expensive jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. He threw them forcefully onto the glass coffee table right in front of me. He told me those were official divorce papers drawn up by his new high-powered attorney. He puffed his chest out and loudly declared that he was officially done carrying dead weight in his life. He said he had successfully secured the sale of my grandfather building and that he was about to be a multimillionaire. He bragged that he had completely outsmarted me and my entire legal team. He told me he controlled all the massive assets now and that the divorce agreement gave him full ownership of the house, the luxury cars, and his brand new private investment firm. He said I was entitled to absolutely nothing because I was a terrible, unsupportive wife who constantly tried to ruin his brilliant career. He said he already had $3 million in pure cash sitting in his private bank account and another $6 million coming by the end of the week. He thought he was untouchable. Loretta stepped forward and pointed a sharp, manicured finger right at my face. She told me to pack my cheap clothes and leave her precious son alone forever. She said DeAndre finally found a real woman who respected him and knew how to provide him with a proper traditional family. She pointed proudly at the stomach of Tasha and announced that her royal family bloodline was finally going to continue with a strong male heir. She told me my barren working-class genes were no longer required in her prestigious circle. Tasha smirked at me and ran her hand along the back of my expensive leather sofa. She told DeAndre that the furniture was completely outdated and that they would need to hire a luxury interior designer to replace everything by next week. DeAndre laughed a loud, booming laugh and pulled a thick wad of $100 bills from his pocket. He told Tasha she could buy whatever she wanted because they had more money than they could ever spend in a single lifetime. DeAndre turned back to me and ordered me to get out of his house immediately. I told him the house was in both of our names and that I needed time to carefully pack my personal belongings. He let out a harsh, cruel laugh echoing through the large room. He told me my time was completely up and that I had zero rights in his universe. He snapped his fingers at Tasha and told her to go upstairs to the master bedroom and clear out my closets. They walked up the grand, curved staircase, laughing and joking like I did not even exist. 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of heavy objects hitting the hardwood floor upstairs. DeAndre appeared at the top of the stairs holding two of my large designer suitcases. He did not even bother carrying them down the steps. He simply kicked them hard. The heavy bags tumbled down the wooden stairs and crashed onto the marble floor of the foyer, bursting wide open and spilling my personal items everywhere. DeAndre walked quickly down the stairs and grabbed the plastic handles of the broken suitcases. He dragged them straight out the open front door and threw them aggressively onto the front lawn. He yelled at me to pick up my trash and get off his property before he called the police and had me arrested for trespassing. He said he was the absolute master of his destiny, and I was just a pathetic obstacle he had successfully destroyed. I looked down at the divorce papers resting quietly on the glass coffee table. Any normal woman would have ripped them up and screamed for immediate justice. Any normal woman would have fought desperately for her half of the marital home and demanded massive alimony. But I was not a normal woman, and I knew exactly what signing those papers actually meant. By signing that specific legal document, I was officially and permanently severing myself from DeAndre. I was legally detaching my name from his incoming massive federal debt. I was protecting my personal corporate assets from the violent black market lender he had just illegally secured funds from. He thought he was forcing me to walk away with nothing, but he was actually handing me the ultimate legal shield. I picked up a black ink pen from the table. I did not shed a single tear or say a single word of protest to his cruel demands. I leaned over and signed my name on the exact dotted lines he requested. I signed away my rights to the large house and the expensive cars, knowing the federal government would be seizing all of it within a matter of days anyway. I stood up straight and handed the signed papers directly to DeAndre. His smug, arrogant smile faltered for a tiny fraction of a second. He was clearly confused by my total lack of emotional resistance, but his massive ego quickly overrode his minimal logic. He snatched the papers roughly from my hand and told me to get out of his sight forever. I walked out the front door, stepping carefully over my ruined suitcases scattered across the green grass. I walked straight to my car, parked on the quiet street. I did not look back at the grand house or the ridiculous red sports car. I just started the engine and drove away, leaving them to celebrate their fake absolute victory. They thought they had ruthlessly evicted me from my own life, but they had actually just locked themselves inside a burning building with no possible exit. The next 3 days were a masterclass in extreme financial recklessness and profound family delusion. Because DeAndre and Connor were completely obsessed with their own public image, they could not just sign the final real estate documents in a quiet, boring corporate office. They needed a massive grand audience to witness their ultimate financial triumph. Connor used his elite real estate connections to rent out the entire private dining room at the most exclusive restaurant in the financial district. It was a highly restricted establishment reserved exclusively for billionaires, elite politicians, and high-profile corporate executives. To prepare for this massive celebration, DeAndre and Tasha spent the entire week burning through the stolen black market loan money like it was an endless supply of water. DeAndre bought custom-tailored Italian silk suits for himself, and Connor paying thousands of dollars in pure cash. He bought Tasha an absurdly large custom diamond engagement ring. The center stone was so massive and ridiculous, it almost looked like a piece of cheap costume jewelry, but I knew he had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. Tasha made sure to post dozens of close-up pictures of her new ring on every single social media platform, bragging endlessly about her wealthy, generous fiancé. Loretta and Jasmine were certainly not left out of the massive illegal spending spree. DeAndre handed his mother and his sister huge, thick stacks of $100 bills right out of his new offshore bank account. They went on a highly aggressive shopping spree through the downtown luxury shopping district. They bought the most expensive designer dresses, imported leather shoes, and exclusive luxury handbags they could possibly find. They were decking themselves out in high-end luxury gear specifically to celebrate the absolute destruction of my life. Loretta purchased a highly flashy sequin gown that was completely inappropriate for a daytime business lunch, but she wanted to look like absolute royalty. I watched all of this absurd behavior unfold from the quiet comfort of a luxury hotel suite I had rented downtown. I did not even need to hire a private investigator to track their daily movements. DeAndre, Jasmine, and Tasha were broadcasting every single moment of their fake wealthy lifestyle on their public social media accounts. Jasmine posted long videos of them drinking premium vintage champagne at a high-end salon, getting their hair and makeup professionally done for the big corporate signing party. Loretta was in the background of one video bragging loudly to the salon staff about how her brilliant son was about to close a massive $6 million real estate deal. She loudly declared that he had finally dumped his toxic, selfish wife, who never believed in his massive potential. The level of their absolute delusion was almost fascinating for me to watch. They were celebrating a massive corporate victory, using dangerous funds they had illegally borrowed against a property they did not even legally own. Every single designer dress, every bottle of expensive champagne, and every glittering diamond was just another heavy piece of concrete tied directly around their ankles. They were sinking fast, and they were actually celebrating the feeling of drowning. On the morning of the scheduled signing party, Connor sent a highly arrogant and demanding email to the Apex Holdings corporate address. He told the mysterious investment board that he had secured the absolute best table in the city, and that he expected the $6 million wire transfer to be initiated the exact moment the ink dried on the legal contracts. Brianna was sitting right next to me in my hotel suite drinking a cup of coffee. She typed a quick, highly professional reply, confirming that the corporate representatives would arrive exactly at noon, with all the necessary final paperwork and the escrow release codes. Then the ultimate display of their massive family arrogance finally arrived. My phone buzzed loudly on the glass table. It was a direct text message from Jasmine. She sent me a high-resolution picture of the private dining room at the restaurant. It was decorated with massive, expensive floral arrangements and imported crystal wine glasses. Below the picture, she sent a highly insulting and petty message. She told me they had an extra empty seat at the very back of the room, and that I should come watch real business people make actual money. She said DeAndre specifically wanted me to see exactly what I was missing out on by being such a terrible, unsupportive wife. They actually went completely out of their way to invite me to their own illegal corporate heist. They wanted me to sit quietly in the corner and cry while they signed away my grandfather's legacy right in front of my face. They wanted to crush my spirit completely and publicly humiliate me in front of the entire family and the restaurant staff. It was the absolute perfect setup. I looked across the room at Brianna and smiled a very slow, dark smile. We had planned for every possible scenario, but their overwhelming greed and extreme vanity had just handed us the absolute perfect dramatic stage. They wanted to put on a massive show for the entire city. They wanted to prove that they were the absolute masters of the universe. I was more than happy to let them have their grand theatrical moment right before I brought the entire stage crashing down directly onto their heads. I stood up from the soft hotel sofa and walked over to the large wardrobe closet in my suite. I had not been sitting around feeling sorry for myself over the past few days. I had been preparing both legally and mentally for this exact specific moment. I opened the heavy wooden closet doors and pulled out a stunning custom-tailored white designer suit. It was sharp, powerful, and completely flawless. It was the exact kind of outfit a high-level corporate chief executive officer wears when she is about to completely obliterate her competition. I was going to attend their lavish little party just like they requested. I was going to let them flaunt their fake diamonds and their stolen designer clothes for a few more minutes. And then I was going to walk right into that expensive restaurant and show them exactly what real power actually looks like. I stepped out of my luxury ride and handed the keys to the valet standing outside the exclusive restaurant. The afternoon sun hit the glass front of the building, but I felt absolutely cool and collected. I walked through the heavy revolving doors, and the hostess immediately recognized my name from the private event list. She led me past the crowded main dining floor toward the back of the establishment, where the massive private rooms were located. I could hear the loud, obnoxious laughter of my former family before the hostess even opened the thick wooden doors. When she pushed the doors open, the entire room fell completely silent. They were all sitting around a massive mahogany table covered in expensive crystal glasses and silver platters of imported caviar. DeAndre was sitting at the absolute head of the table, wearing his shiny new Italian silk suit. Tasha was sitting right next to him, holding up her left hand so the ambient light would catch her ridiculous, massive diamond ring. Connor was positioned on the other side, shuffling his fake legal documents with a look of supreme corporate importance. Jasmine and Loretta were draped in their brand-new designer clothes, looking like cheap, loud imitations of actual wealth. They all stared at me, expecting to see a broken, weeping woman wearing sweatpants and begging for absolute mercy. They wanted to see the heavy toll of their cruel eviction painted all over my tired face. Instead, they saw me standing tall in my pristine, custom white designer suit. My hair was styled perfectly, and my makeup was absolutely flawless. I did not look like a defeated wife who had just been aggressively thrown out of her own home. I looked like a highly powerful chief executive officer arriving to inspect her latest corporate acquisition. The radiant, terrifying calm I projected instantly made the entire room feel incredibly nervous. Loretta was the first one to break the stunned, heavy silence. She let out a loud fake laugh and asked me why I bothered dressing up so nicely for a funeral. She told me the funeral was for my grandfather's dusty old legacy, and that I really should have worn black to mourn my massive financial loss. Jasmine chimed in immediately, telling me I was completely pathetic for showing up to a celebration where nobody actually wanted my presence. DeAndre just smirked and pointed to a small wooden chair situated far away from the main dining table near the kitchen service door. He told me that was the designated spectator section, and I needed to sit there quietly while the real adults handled massive corporate business. I did not react to their petty, childish insults. I simply smiled a calm, cold smile and walked slowly toward the back of the room. My expensive heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, echoing loudly in the sudden silent tension. I took my seat in the isolated corner, crossing my legs gracefully and resting my hands in my lap. I told DeAndre I was perfectly comfortable sitting in the back because it gave me the absolute best panoramic view of the entire performance. Connor scoffed and looked down at his heavy gold watch. He proudly announced to the table that the corporate representatives from Apex Holdings would be arriving any second with the $6 million escrow release codes. I nodded slowly, staring directly into his arrogant eyes, waiting patiently for the final act of their tragic play to completely unfold. I sat in my quiet corner and watched the ultimate display of corporate greed unfold right in front of my eyes. Connor pulled a thick stack of crisp legal documents from his expensive leather briefcase. He laid them perfectly flat in the center of the massive mahogany dining table. He smoothed his hands over the expensive paper, treating the forged documents like they were sacred religious texts. He looked around the table with a massive, arrogant smile and told everyone that this was the exact moment their entire family legacy would officially change forever. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. He unscrewed the cap with slow, deliberate movements, making sure everyone was watching his incredible financial genius in action. He signed his name on the designated broker line with a loud, aggressive flourish. Then he slid the heavy documents across the polished wood directly toward DeAndre. DeAndre picked up the gold pen and looked over his shoulder directly at me, sitting in the back of the room. He told me to pay very close attention because I was about to witness how a real man secures his financial empire. He said he was officially signing away the heavy burden I had forced him to carry for 7 long years. Then he lowered his head and signed his name right next to my perfectly forged signature. He signed the final legal transfer papers, effectively attempting to sell a $6 million commercial property to Apex Holdings. The entire table erupted into loud, obnoxious applause. Loretta clapped her hands together so hard her expensive diamond bracelets violently clashed against each other. She raised her crystal glass filled with premium vintage champagne and proposed a loud toast to her brilliant son. She said he had finally shed the useless weight of his past and stepped into the glorious, wealthy future he always deserved. Jasmine raised her glass high and tapped it loudly against the glass of Tasha. Jasmine welcomed Tasha to the family, calling her the true lady of the manor. Tasha giggled and rested her hand heavily on her flat stomach, making sure the massive diamond engagement ring caught the bright light of the crystal chandelier. They were completely drowning in their own massive egos. Connor checked his expensive gold watch again and told the table that the corporate representatives from the purchasing board were exactly 2 minutes away. He instructed everyone to sit up straight and act like sophisticated members of elite society. He said these were high-level billionaires dropping $6 million in pure cash, and they needed to see absolute corporate professionalism. DeAndre quickly adjusted his silk tie and told Tasha to stop giggling and sit properly. The room fell into a tense, greedy silence as they waited for their massive payday to walk through the heavy wooden doors. Exactly at noon, the brass handles of the private dining room doors turned slowly. The heavy doors swung open wide. 3 men stepped into the lavish room. The man walking in the front was wearing a sharp gray suit and carrying a slim black leather briefcase. I recognized him immediately. It was my private attorney, Mr. Harrison. Walking closely behind him were two highly intimidating men wearing identical dark navy suits. They were physically imposing with broad shoulders and completely expressionless faces. They moved with absolute military precision, their cold eyes quickly scanning the entire room before locking directly onto the mahogany dining table. Connor immediately stood up from his chair, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He flashed his brightest, most arrogant salesman smile and walked quickly toward the three men. He extended his hand confidently toward Mr. Harrison, completely unaware of who he actually was. Connor loudly welcomed the gentleman from Apex Holdings to the absolute finest restaurant in the entire city. He told them he had the final transfer documents completely signed and ready for their immediate review. He pointed proudly to the thick stack of papers resting on the table next to the empty champagne bottles. He casually asked if they had brought the secure escrow release codes to initiate the $6 million wire transfer so they could all go celebrate. Mr. Harrison did not shake the extended hand of Connor. He simply looked down at the empty hand and then looked right past Connor toward the back of the dining room. He gave me a very slight respectful nod. That was my official cue to enter the stage. I stood up from my small wooden chair in the isolated corner. I smoothed the front of my pristine white designer suit and walked slowly toward the front of the room. The sharp clicking sound of my heels broke the sudden heavy tension in the air. I walked right past the shocked open mouths of Loretta and Jasmine. I stepped directly beside Mr. Harrison and flanked the two men in the dark navy suits. I turned around and faced my former family standing shoulder to shoulder with the ultimate authority they had completely underestimated. DeAndre dropped his crystal champagne glass. The delicate glass hit the polished mahogany table and shattered instantly, spilling expensive, sticky champagne everywhere. He stared at me, standing alongside the corporate representatives with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally realized that the men standing at the front of the room were not wealthy corporate investors bringing him millions of dollars. He noticed the small gold badges clipped discreetly to the leather belts of the two men in the dark suits. They were federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. Connor slowly lowered his extended hand, his face draining of all color until he looked entirely sick. He looked back and forth between me and Mr. Harrison, completely unable to process the absolute nightmare unfolding right in front of him. I looked directly at Connor and then shifted my gaze to DeAndre. I told them the corporate board of Apex Holdings had thoroughly reviewed their lovely forged documents. I said the board was incredibly impressed by their massive, absolute stupidity. I stood there completely motionless, watching their fake wealthy universe completely collapse into a dark, suffocating abyss of massive federal consequences. I raised my hands and began to clap very slowly. The sharp sound echoed through the silent private dining room. I looked right at DeAndre and Connor and told them I wanted to personally thank them for selling my own building right back to me. The sheer confusion on the face of Loretta was almost comical. She looked around the table asking what was happening and who these strange men were. I reached into the sleek black leather briefcase Mr. Harrison was holding. I pulled out a thick stack of verified corporate incorporation papers. I tossed them casually onto the mahogany table right on top of the fake transfer documents Connor had just signed. I told Connor to go ahead and read the primary shareholder name registered under Apex Holdings. His hands were shaking violently as he picked up the crisp white pages. He read the legal text, and his arrogant pale face turned the color of absolute ash. He saw my full legal name listed as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of the massive Phantom Corporation. I told him my 24-year-old assistant Brianna had been the mysterious corporate buyer emailing him all week. I told him he had been aggressively negotiating with my administrative secretary and bending over backward to impress a girl he had actively tried to get fired. DeAndre fell back into his chair like he had been physically struck. He looked at the shattered crystal on the table and then looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, choking sound came out of his throat. Tasha was pressing herself against the back of her chair, trying to distance herself from the sudden toxic atmosphere. She pulled her hand down into her lap, hiding the massive fake diamond ring she had been proudly displaying just moments ago. Jasmine started to cry, loud, ugly tears completely ruining her expensive professional makeup. She finally understood that the $6 million wire transfer they had been planning to spend was an absolute total illusion. Loretta refused to accept reality. She stood up from her chair, knocking over a silver platter of expensive food. She pointed a shaking finger at me and yelled that I was completely lying. She told the room that women from my pathetic working-class background did not own massive corporate investment firms. She demanded that Connor fix the situation immediately and force me to hand over the money they were promised. She actually ordered Connor to call the restaurant security and have me physically removed from the private dining room so they could finish their wealthy celebration in peace. But Connor was entirely ignoring the insane ranting of his mother-in-law. He was staring blindly at the corporate ownership documents, trying to find a way out of the massive trap closing around him. DeAndre suddenly turned on his brother-in-law. The perfect criminal partnership instantly dissolved into pathetic finger-pointing. DeAndre grabbed the lapels of Connor's expensive new silk suit and violently shook him. He yelled at Connor, asking him what he had done and how he could be so incredibly stupid to sell the building back to the exact person they stole it from. Connor aggressively pushed DeAndre away, telling him to shut his mouth and let the real professionals handle the complicated legal matters. Connor was too incredibly arrogant to accept complete defeat. His massive male privilege refused to let a black woman outsmart him in the corporate arena. He slammed his fist down onto the table, rattling the heavy silver platters. He yelled that it absolutely did not matter if I owned the shell company. He pointed a shaking finger at the forged documents resting on the table. He said the power of attorney they found in the basement vault was officially notarized and fully legally binding. He claimed he had the legal right to act as my financial broker, and that the sale was completely legitimate under commercial real estate law. He desperately tried to twist the narrative to save his own miserable skin. He turned away from me and addressed the two federal agents directly attempting to use his fake corporate authority. He told the men in the dark navy suits that there was absolutely no crime happening here today. He said this was simply a messy domestic dispute between a bitter divorced couple. He said I was just a hysterical, angry wife trying to cause a massive public scene because I was incredibly jealous of the beautiful new pregnant girlfriend sitting at the table. He puffed out his chest and declared that he had executed a flawless legal contract and that the commercial building now officially belonged to Apex Holdings, which meant he was still legally entitled to his massive broker commission. Connor actually had the absolute audacity to demand that I authorize the $6 million release code immediately. He said he had done his job as a licensed real estate broker, and he wanted his profit right now so he could walk away from my crazy, toxic family forever. I listened to his pathetic, desperate rambling without blinking a single time. He was clinging to a completely fabricated reality because the actual truth was entirely too terrifying for his fragile ego to comprehend. He truly believed the fake power of attorney gave him absolute immunity from his own massive criminal actions. He thought he had found a brilliant legal loophole that would protect him from the federal authorities standing right inside the room watching him sweat. I looked at Mr. Harrison, and we both shared a very brief, silent look of profound pity for the absolute idiot standing across from us. I turned my attention back to Connor and told him his understanding of commercial real estate law was absolutely embarrassing for a licensed professional. I told him he should have spent far less time buying expensive custom suits and much more time actually reading the fine print on the legal documents he was busy stealing in the middle of the night. I walked slowly around the large mahogany table until I was standing directly next to him. He tried to maintain his aggressive, dominant posture, but I could smell the sour stench of raw fear radiating from his skin. I looked down at the forged power of attorney he was so incredibly proud of. I told him he was absolutely right about one very small, specific detail. I told him the sale of the building was absolutely final, and there was no going back now. But then I smiled that cold, dark smile again and prepared to drop the massive legal guillotine directly onto his arrogant neck. I looked Connor straight in the eyes and told him his precious power of attorney was absolutely useless. I explained to the entire silent room that my grandfather was a highly intelligent man who knew exactly how to protect his family legacy from greedy outsiders. 10 years ago, long before I ever met DeAndre, my grandfather placed the entire commercial property into a highly restricted, irrevocable trust. I told Connor that I did not actually own the building directly, and I never had. I am simply the designated managing director and the sole beneficiary of the trust. I told him I legally could not sell that building, even if I desperately wanted to. Connor started shaking his head back and forth, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He stuttered out that he had the physical deed and the notarized papers proving my signature. I laughed a very quiet, completely humorless laugh. I pointed to the thick stack of papers resting on the mahogany table. I told him the documents he stole from the basement vault were entirely fabricated by my private attorney and the federal authorities. I explained that the dark blue ink used to forge my signature contained a highly classified magnetic tracking compound. I told him the moment he handed those fake documents to the black market lender to secure his $3 million loan, he triggered a massive federal alert. The two federal agents stepped forward, completely eliminating any remaining space for Connor to run. The lead agent spoke in a deep, booming voice that shook the crystal glasses on the table. He officially placed Connor and DeAndre under immediate arrest for severe federal mortgage fraud, criminal identity theft, and interstate wire fraud. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and grabbed the wrists of Connor. The sound of the metal ratchets clicking tightly echoed loudly in the private dining room. The massive, arrogant ego of Connor instantly vanished. His tailored silk suit suddenly looked completely ridiculous on his shaking frame. His entitled white privilege completely shattered right in front of my eyes. He dropped to his knees right on the expensive restaurant carpet and started sobbing uncontrollably. He begged the federal agents to let him go, claiming he was just a legitimate real estate broker who had been tricked by his brother-in-law. DeAndre stood frozen in absolute terror, watching his brilliant financial partner crying like a small, terrified child. The second federal agent grabbed the arms of DeAndre, pulling them roughly behind his back and snapping the heavy steel cuffs tightly onto his wrists. Loretta started screaming wildly, demanding the agents release her innocent son. She yelled that DeAndre was a good man and that I was the evil mastermind trying to destroy their beautiful family. I walked slowly over to where Loretta was standing. I looked at her angry red face and decided it was the perfect time to deliver her specific punishment. I told her the federal authorities were not the only people who knew about the massive fraud they had just committed. I told her the ruthless underground lenders had also been officially notified that the $6 million commercial building they held as collateral was completely untouchable. I watched the eyes of Loretta widen in absolute horror as I explained the brutal financial reality. Because the original collateral was entirely fake, the black market lenders were immediately calling in the massive $3 million loan. I told Loretta I knew exactly how DeAndre managed to secure such a massive illegal loan with his terrible credit history. I knew she had secretly signed her own name on the private lending documents, acting as the ultimate financial guarantor for her precious golden boy. I told her the dangerous lenders were currently initiating aggressive asset seizures. I informed her that her massive brick house, her expensive cars, and her entire retirement pension were going to be permanently seized by the end of the week. Loretta let out a high-pitched, devastating shriek and physically collapsed back into her chair, holding her chest, as if she could not breathe. Jasmine rushed to her mother, crying hysterically and cursing my name. But I was not finished yet. I turned my attention to Tasha, who was pressing her back tightly against the wall of the restaurant. Her eyes darted rapidly between the handcuffed men and the weeping women. The moment she heard the terrifying words, federal prison and complete asset seizure, her ultimate gold digger survival instincts kicked in immediately. Tasha looked down at the massive fake diamond ring sitting heavily on her finger. She realized the man she thought was a wealthy corporate kingpin was actually a completely broke federal criminal who was about to spend the next decade in a concrete cell. She pulled the ridiculous ring off her finger with incredibly fast, frantic movements. She threw the heavy ring directly onto the mahogany table where it bounced loudly against the empty champagne bottles. She did not say a single word of comfort to the man who had supposedly loved her. She just grabbed her expensive designer purse, turned around on her high heels, and ran out of the private dining room as fast as her legs could carry her. DeAndre watched his beautiful young mistress abandon him completely, and a fresh wave of absolute devastation washed over his tear-stained face. I walked back to my small chair in the corner of the room and picked up my designer handbag. I reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of official divorce papers DeAndre had thrown at me just a few days ago. I pulled the cap off my favorite pen. I stood directly in front of my handcuffed, cheating husband. I told him he was absolutely right about one thing when he kicked me out of our home. I told him we needed to sever all of our legal ties immediately. I placed the papers on the table and signed my name on the final remaining lines, making sure our divorce was absolutely permanent. By signing those specific papers, I legally detached my entire corporate empire from his incoming massive federal debt and the dangerous black market loan. I picked up the signed documents and dropped them casually right onto his lap. I told him he could keep the house and the luxury cars because they all belong to the federal government now anyway. I adjusted my pristine white designer suit, feeling the absolute weight of 7 years completely lift off my shoulders. I was a free, incredibly wealthy, and completely untouchable woman. I looked at the miserable, pathetic group of people sitting around the ruined celebration table. I looked right into the terrified, crying eyes of DeAndre. I told him sometimes the absolute best way to get rid of toxic trash is to hand them a shiny fake key and politely watch them lock themselves inside their very own prison cell. I turned my back on all of them and walked gracefully out of the private dining room, leaving them to face the absolute destruction they had so greedily built for themselves. The greatest lesson I learned from this ordeal is that true power never requires screaming. When toxic people try to destroy your life, they are always blinded by their own greed. My former family thought my silence was a weakness, but it was actually the ultimate strategy. You never have to lower yourself to their miserable level. The sweetest revenge is simply stepping aside and letting them walk directly into their own traps. Protect your peace and your assets always. Have you ever had to outsmart someone who underestimated you? Share your story below and please subscribe for more today.